let's find out what the Shadow Cabinet view, shall we? Because Ed Miliband, who is the Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary, is here this morning. They've unveiled a new green policy, haven't you, that I'm sure you'll be very keen to talk about in a moment. I just want to get your reaction to Andy Burnham there. Would you be pleased to see him back in Westminster?
Definitely. Andy's doing a brilliant job as Mayor of Greater Manchester, and I think what you see right across the country is Labour local authority leaders, Labour mayors, if you like, showing what can be done if you're in power. But look, Andy is a great talent for our party, and he can serve us in multiple ways. OK, right, let's talk about your policy. You're announcing today a Labour government would deliver net zero for electricity by 2030. Talk to us about that. A zero-carbon power system. This is a world-leading commitment that we are making. And why are we doing it, Sophie? It will make a difference in a number of ways. First of all, it will cut people's energy bills. Because let's be clear about this, the only way to get out of this fossil fuels crisis, the only way to cut bills is green energy. Green energy is currently 9 times cheaper than gas. That's renewables like wind and solar. They're 9 times cheaper than gas. So it will save £93 billion off bills over the coming years. It will give us energy security. We won't be relying on Putin's gas, for example. Homegrown, renewable and nuclear power. Thirdly, it will create jobs, 500,000 jobs for our country, and it puts us in the forefront of the fight against the climate crisis. So it's the kind of radical action we need, and crucially, and this is a contrast with last Friday, it is about building an economy that works for the many, right across our country, not about building an economy which is for a few at the top of our society.
You say it's radical. At the same time, the government has also committed to net zero electricity by 2035. It's just 5 years earlier, right?
Well, just 5 years. I mean, 5 years is a long time. We're in a decisive moment. And look, people...
OK, so how much will it cost to do it 5 years earlier, then?
Well, here's the thing. The vast majority of this will come not from the taxpayer, but will come from private investment. You see, private investors are lining up to go for wind energy and solar energy, but they can't because government blocks them on onshore wind, blocks them on solar, and doesn't make the investments we need.
What will the cost be? Just explain.
Well, so we've made a pledge of a £28 billion each and every year, a Green Prosperity Plan pledge. We think this will cost around £2 billion a year to make this happen. So a small proportion of that pledge, and it is the right thing to do for the country. And crucially, you know, if I'd been on your programme 10 years ago, your programme wasn't on 10 years ago, but if I'd been on 10 years ago, I would have said, look, green is the ethical choice, and it's the right thing to do for the long term. It's the ethical choice and the economic choice now. Now, it's such a contrast with the government because they say, well, the answer is fracking and all these things which will not make any difference to bills and aren't safe.
You talk about affordability, and obviously everyone, I think, or the vast majority of people would accept that green energy and renewables is a key part to affordability. Yeah. But at the same time, if your focus was just on affordability, you'd be looking at everything, wouldn't you? You'd be looking at green renewables, yes, you would, but you'd also be looking at North Sea oil and gas. You'd also be looking at fracking too, because don't you just need to look at the...
No, you wouldn't. It's really important to explain this to people. Look, gas is sold on a global market. The price we pay for North Sea gas or fracked gas, if that ever happens, is exactly the same as we pay for imported gas. Don't take my word for it. Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, said it will make no difference to price. It's an illusion to think...
But we're looking at supply overall, aren't we?
Yes.
Global supply. And so that is... whoever is producing oil and gas, who isn't Putin, that is going to benefit, isn't it?
No. I mean, look, we've got to use the North Sea. We're going to be carry on using the North Sea. But if what you're asking me is fracking or some dash for gas in the North Sea going to be the answer, it is not going to be the answer, because it won't bring down prices. And this is the key thing. And on fracking, I've got to say, Sophie, I mean, you know, it's obviously been slightly lost because of the appalling budget we had on Friday from Kwasi Kwarteng. But the idea that the government that promised in the 2019 general election not to restart fracking unless it was safe, now is going to do so. And what is their excuse? Well, they say not that they found out it's safe, but that a bit more risk is a price worth paying for people across our country. It just says it all about this government. They stand up for the fossil fuel companies. They don't stand up for the British people.
So you say that you want to spend £28 billion a year on the kind of green energy deal. At a time when borrowing is at the levels that it is, partly, of course, because of government policy, but let's be frank, mainly because of what we've seen with inflation, energy bills and so on as well. We know that you would also like to freeze bills. Is spending £28 billion a year a sensible thing to do?
Absolutely it is. And I'll tell you why it is. And you see it with the policy I'm announcing today. The whole reason we're making this investment is we get a return. And what you're going to be hearing from Labour this week is not just today's plan on 2030 zero carbon power, our world-leading plan, but you're going to be hearing a series of policies from me, from Rachel Reeves, from Keir Starmer, about how making those investments will create the jobs across our country that we need, get us ahead in the global race. You see, the difference between us and the government is not whether we need growth. Yes, they've had an appalling growth record. I'm glad they're finally admitting it. The question is, how do you create that growth? They say tax cuts for some people at the top, for millionaires and bankers, is going to create the growth. The wealth will trickle down to everybody else. Well, we know that's been tried in the past and totally failed. We say something different. You build the economy from the ground up by making these investments. And today is phase one, the first building block.
At the same time, though, look, the evidence on tax cuts is mixed and growth is mixed, right?
It's not mixed.
Well, if you look at, Reagan, for example, they would point to in the States.
No.
But
look, let me tell you, I've got to take you.
Going on
I want to pick you up on this.
growth.
Hang on a second. The International Monetary Fund, right? Hardly a kind of group of kind of loony lefties. The International Monetary Fund says that actually, if you look, increasing the incomes of the top share, the top part of our society does not lead to higher growth, quite the opposite.
OK, so would a Labour government reverse the 45p cut?
Well, look, we've said we're against it. We said it's the wrong thing to do. Let me just tell you why it's the wrong thing to do.
Yes or no answer.
Giving a £50,000 tax cut to millionaires in our country is not the right answer.
So
now, tax policy. Just let me answer the question. I think
Okay.
you'll be pleased. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves set out tax policy, and Keir will be saying more about this quite shortly. But let me be clear. We're going to be consistent in our election manifesto with our opposition to the 45p tax cut, because we think it's the wrong thing to do for the country.
Understood. How about the 19p cut, the cut from 20p to 19?
No, we don't think that should be reversed because, remember that when we're talking about this basic rate cut, I mean, that's people start paying that at £12,500.
So you disagree with Andy Burnham then?
Well, I don't think we should reverse that tax cut. Look, the point is the government has raised taxes on ordinary families by massive amounts. The Institute of Fiscal Study says that even with that tax cut from 20 to 19, ordinary families will still be paying more in tax. In fact, everyone up to £155,000 will be paying more tax than at the start of the parliament, so we won't be reversing that, no.
OK, understood. Now, if you ask Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng to sum up in a word what their government was all about...
A word, yes.
I can imagine what your word might be, but their word would be growth, right? What would be your word to sum up what this Labour government...
Well, look,
or Labour
I won't give you one word, but look, it says on our conference backdrop, a fairer, greener future, and that is what we're about. Fairness, because we don't think that as you look at the problems our country faces, that the answer is lifting the bank bonus cap or tax cuts for millionaires, cost of living crisis, the NHS. So fairer, greener, and the two go together, and they produce not only fairness, but prosperity for our country.
Do you think that there is I guess some would say that Labour hasn't been bold enough going forward on setting out what you would do if you're in government. On strikes, for example, are you for or against strikes?
Well, look, I think
do you think that there is a need for Labour to be a little bit more radical?
Well, look, I think, I was sort of leader of the opposition, so I've got some experience, I've got some previous on this. There's a kind of cycle to these things that, at the beginning of the Parliament, you tend to be less specific, more thematic. I think what you're seeing from Labour this week and what you're going to see in the coming days, and the first thing today, this is a bold plan we're announcing. I mean, no other major country in the world has said what we are saying today, that by 2030 we'll have a zero-carbon power system. I mean, that is a big deal, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the days to come.
We'll be seeing a lot more of Keir Starmer as well, someone that has been described as boring, according to some anonymous briefings. Can you...
I'm sure I was described as that too, probably not anonymously either.
Can you tell us something surprising about Keir Starmer?
Something surprising? Actually, I think what you see with Keir Starmer is what you get. And actually, I think the British people want that.
And what is that, then?
Frankly, dependability, decency, integrity, somebody who's going to do the right thing for the country. And, we had the years of Boris Johnson. We had somebody who, broke the rules, broke the law, did all those things.
You're not up against Boris Johnson anymore, though?
No, we're not. But I think people want someone of decency, integrity, who knows where he came from and knows what he's in politics for. Look, he looks at this country and sees deep injustice. And he says, we're going to change this economy, we're going to change this country, and you're going to be hearing a lot more of that from him this week.
You mentioned that you've been Labour leader before.
Yeah.
I remember it very well on the
You
battle
do,
bus
you
with
do,
you.
you do. I was very pleased to have you on the bus.
I'm sure, well, most of the time anyway, I'm sure.
Yeah, all the time, all the time.
Now, have you given Keir Starmer any advice on how to cope with, I guess, some of the pressures of being leader?
I mean, I sort of think he doesn't need my advice. I mean, the only thing I'd say is, and it goes to the question you just asked me, which is, don't pretend to be something you're not. And that's what's been very good about Keir's leadership.
Do you think you did that a bit?
No. I mean, I think probably I mean, sort of, you know, this is sort of ancient history, but, you know, in a way, I've said I wish I'd been bolder as Labour leader. Maybe I felt too much of the weight of the office, you know, felt too constrained. But I think, you know, I think big ideas are our friend in politics. I think people in the country, and remember, it's about people in the country, they, you know, I lost the election in 2015. Since then, we've had the Brexit referendum. We've had all kinds of things that have happened in our country. I think all of them show one thing, though. So many people say the economy, the country doesn't work for me. What are you going to do to make life better for me? What are you going to do to change things for me? And I think that's where Labour's focus needs to be.
Do you think he's got a better chance of winning an election than you did?
Yes. Yes, definitely. And look, I think the thing about Keir is that people can see him as a credible Prime Minister. And I think they're going to be seeing this week the ideas, the things he cares about that he wants to do if he was to win that election.
OK, thanks very much.